Good afternoon, it's Monday the 11th of September 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Good to be back. Well, apparently it's windy in the Netherlands, and probably that's not unusual.
Well, speaking of bad smells, Brian, it seems that according to the Washington Examiner, at least, one bad smell they just cannot get rid of, and that's Barack Obama. So the headline here is Barack Obama, the former president who won't go away. And I'm not really interested in this article particularly, other than to say that, you know, in the United States, they seem to have the same problem that we have here in Britain, because the bad smell that we can't get rid of course, is Tony Blair. So he's got his oar in over the weekend and saying, well, basically, you've got to be subversive if you're a Tory MP, a Tory member of the government. You've got to rise up. You've got to find the leadership within yourself. You've got to oppose the government over Brexit and then join him as he forms a new political party. I mean,
is this domestic terrorism? Is inciting domestic terrorism to rise up against the government?
Absolutely. But, you know, at the very least, the lack of self-awareness and the lack of what people think of him just continues to astound.
Well, it's called ego, Mike, I think.
Right,
but can you imagine anybody joining a party run by Tony Blair at the moment? That would be the death certificate, wouldn't it, for your political career?
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, what's he talking about? The continuing saga over the European Union withdrawal bill, the so-called Great Repeal Bill. Well, here's Boris, because he had plenty to say about that today. So just to remind everybody, this bill removes the European Communities Act 1972 from the statute books. It removes, according to the parliamentary website, it removes the competence of the European Union institutions to legislate for the UK. This is a lie, of course, because as the Brexit process continues and we pursue our new relationship with the European Union, because that's how it's being described by government now, we are going to sign up to agreements which will define partnerships with EU institutions, for example, Euratom or Europol, various other EU institutions. And of course, as part of those partnership agreements, we're going to be required to sign up to certain terms. And that will mean, well, what will it mean? It'll mean absolutely no change. EU institutions won't legislate for the UK, perhaps, but in order to stay within the terms of any partnerships the EU will have, then the UK is going to have to legislate for itself on behalf of these EU institutions. So I'd like to know how that's any different in practice. Now, sticking just briefly, before we comment on what Boris is saying here, just briefly on this, one of our viewers was in contact with their local MP, Brian, asking about this issue of the European Union withdrawal bill and the so-called Henry VIII powers. This is the business of the government giving itself the right to do anything using statutory instrument. And the response that she got from Chris Davies MP was as follows: the powers in the clause of the bill only give the government and the devolved administrations a time-limited power for 2 years to make technical and legal corrections to deficiencies in the law. Ministers will not have the power to make major policy changes. That's nonsense. But anyway, he says ministers will not have the power to make major policy changes, and changes will be still subject to parliamentary scrutiny and oversight. Changes will be made by statutory instrument, a standard and commonly used parliamentary procedure that MPs will be able to show their discontent with. I believe that ministers are aware of the British public feeling towards this and will not overstep the mark by using the power the bill gives them only to make technical and legal corrections. Do you have any confidence in such a loaded tripe?
No confidence whatsoever. And of course, you know, this is what we're always told, is that we should trust people in Parliament because they will never do anything which is untoward, and they're going to have these very serious powers, but trust them, you know, they will do the right thing.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I was going to say, as we move on through the news today, of course, we're going to be able to see that time and time again, Parliament and the politicians do not do the right thing.
Well, absolutely. But Boris said that we've got to bring all this EU law onto the statute books, the UK statute books, because otherwise there would be chaos. So let's see how the vote turns out. I suspect perhaps chaos is the aim here, but anyway, we move on. Juncker hasn't actually said it yet, but he's been reported that he's going to say it. Basically, this was the other thing Boris had to say this morning. Well, fantastic. Let's get on with it. Let's have a renaissance of the European Union.
Yeah, because people voted to come out of the European Union, so it's natural that we should do everything we can to get ourselves back in as if nothing's happened.
A reformed European Union, again, we hint back towards the best of both worlds document, which David Cameron produced. But why is Boris saying this? Well, this is because apparently Jean-Claude Juncker has decided that this is the moment. Brexit brings us to the moment which will drive a renaissance for the European Union. So Boris, being a Brexiteer, very keen to see that renaissance. He wants to see Britain back in a new relationship with a reformed European Union.
And 17 million people who voted out can simply disappear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Boris also talking about the British response to Hurricane Irma, of course, because quite a number of British overseas territories affected by it. The UK government on Saturday pledged to double any public donations to the British Red Cross, apparently. So let's have a look and see what Boris had to say. He said, "I've just come out of Cobra, where I've again been discussing the catastrophe that engulfed our friends in the British Virgin Islands and other places in the Caribbean, and of course across the Caribbean, the victims of Hurricane Irma." He said...
He's been very busy, hasn't he?
He has, yes. He said that there are 3 planes going in today, 500 British troops in the region, 125 UK soldiers on the British Virgin Islands alone to help sort things out, get these wonderful places back on their feet. Yes. He said, if you want to donate to help the British people over there and the overseas territories, then we will match your contributions to the Red Cross pound for pound. That's what he said.
Right. So we've got all of this government-inspired aid agency capability, but when it comes to us, we're there with the Red Cross.
Well, no, because in fact what Pretty had to say was, Boris, you're off your head. We're only going to match public donations up to the £3 million limit. Idiot. Yeah. So that's what she had to say, because basically this is Department for International Aid Match Scheme, it's called, and there's a £3 million limit on it.
Yeah.
So if the British people were to donate more than £3 million to the British Red Cross, in fact, that's tough. They would not be matching with pound for pound donations after all. And what else did Boris had to say? Of course, our highest priority is to get our financial services up and running again as quickly as possible. He doesn't give a damn about the people of the British Virgin Islands or any of the other Caribbean
Let's get those
islands.
Offshore accounts ticking and working.
Absolutely, that is exactly what's going on there.
Well, it's just fascinating that you've picked up on Boris and this aspect of money circulating in the international banking cartels. We should bring in Prime Minister Theresa May, and she's had this to say, that she's looking into the student debt burden, and she's a bit worried at the moment that the Tories are going to lose younger voters. So she thinks that if the government gives a bit of help on financing education, she's going to win some of them back. Well, this is a fascinating subject when you dig into it. This is The Guardian from a little while ago. It said that the UK student loan debt has now soared to more than 100 billion. So obviously this is just an accident really, Mike, that it's climbing like this. And of course the government, we understand, is very worried. Theresa May is very concerned for the students. So we thought we'd just have a little look into it. So The Guardian here, worth reading this article because there's quite a lot of detail. It says that the outstanding debt on loans has jumped by 16.6% to 100.5 billion at the end of March. So that's climbed from 86.2 billion. Figures have come out of the Student Loans Company. We'll be having a look at them. And England's got the lion's share of that debt, nearly £90 billion. So these are young people not even starting their working lives, dragged into debt. And the article went on to say, in England, the average amount of debt for each graduate is £32,220. By comparison, student debt in the US is only 34,000, so £27,000, a bit cheaper in the US than in UK. But basically, students will pay once they're earning more than 21,000, and that figure could be as high as 9% of what they earn above 21,000. So you do all the work, you go through, you get the degree, you struggle through the job market to get a job, and then if you're successful, wham, in comes the government with a 9%. That says at the end of that paragraph, however, after 30 years, any outstanding student debt is written off. But I think we can be pretty sure whoever put the loan agreement together is quite confident they're still going to make a profit even with that write-off after 30 years. So if you've never done it before, go and have a look at the student loan company. If you have a look at the people, of course, you've got a lot of experience from the international monetary scene, bankers, ex-bankers, private equity people, but also many of them have worked in government in HMRC or in the Treasury. So this is a money organisation, and they've got some interesting things to say. They say very clearly, while our existing systems and processes are built to deliver government policy, they also need to do this in a way that recognises the needs of our customers. So they are saying very clearly there, Mike, that they work absolutely to input government policy, and students, well, they're customers, but they come second. They go on to say this: the Directorate is at the heart of our renewed and redoubled focus on our repayment service, a key priority being to work with HMRC and BIS to increase the yield and value of the loan book. Now, you can correct me, Mike, here, but it seems to me that if your objective is to increase the yield and the value of the loan book, the aim of this company is to produce more debt.
Absolutely.
More debt. So this is government policy. Theresa May lying, of course, because the policy of the student loan company run by the British government is to create more debt amongst students in order to get a greater yield for the company and the government.
Absolutely.
And if you wade through their amazing transformational documentation, there's a lot of graphs. This is the student loan company boasting about how their own turnover is increasing. So at the end here, they've got up to whatever it is, 140 million, I think it is. So their own turnover, their own pension fund, their own salaries is of huge importance. Page after page of new age management speak, nothing to do with helping students through their courses to pay as little as possible. So interesting look. Here's the sort of glossy part of the website. But it gets even more interesting because 1998, the government sold off 2 tranches of what it called mortgage-style loans. These were all loans associated with a student loan organisation. Who did it sell them off to? Well, Greenwich NatWest, which is now actually RBS Securities.
So it's securitised the loans then?
Indeed, yeah.
So that means that nobody actually owes any money to the student loan company then?
On the basis that you can't sell on debt, is where you're coming from. Absolutely correct. But of course, as we'll see, the government is not only playing a con on this one, they're going to use bully boy tactics. So alongside Greenwich NatWest, Deutsche Bank took a big chunk. And the Nationwide Building Society, this little lot raised about 2 billion. So we sold on that student debt, raised 2 billion. But just to make sure that the students didn't understand what the scam was, we had to bring in the heavyweight. So another big chunk was sold on to Arudio, debt collectors, this is Coalition Debt Collectors, Arrow Global, and a private equity firm, Carvel.
Good stuff.
And this is the actual sums of money. So apparently they paid about 160 million to buy 890 million of student debt that was outstanding. And obviously, what were the tactics going to be to put pressure on the students? So if we come back to Theresa May, the Prime Minister, she's basically saying, well, we need to ease up a bit on the students at the moment to help the Tory vote. But in principle, I'm delighted with our ongoing policy to drown young people in debt, and it's working well. 6% interest, that was mentioned in the original Independent article. Well, she must think that's pretty good because she wants to keep it going.
And just as a final point on this, of course, that interest begins immediately, even though there's no requirement to start repaying. The interest begins immediately.
It sucks the students in beautifully, Mike, because initially, no, you don't have to repay anything. There's no problem. So they don't think that any any interest is accumulating. And then later, of course, when the payments start, they realise that all of that debt has mounted up. So it's a scam. It's done in relation with corrupt international banking cartels and investors, and it's promoted by the British government.
Okay, human rights, then a statement from the High Commissioner for Human Rights to the Human Rights Council. He made this today, actually. He gave this speech. Well, I just wanted to highlight a couple of points out of this. He was talking about, amongst other things, Myanmar, Burma. He said, last year I warned that the pattern of gross violations of the human rights of the Rohingya suggested a widespread or systematic attack against the community, possibly amounting to crimes against humanity, if so established by a court of law. Because Myanmar has refused access to human rights investigators, the current situation cannot yet be fully assessed, but the situation seems a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. That's exactly what David Scott said on this programme on Friday. So it's nice to see that the UN High Commissioner agrees with him following the weekend. He went on to say the Myanmar government should stop claiming that the Rohingyas are setting fire to their own homes and laying waste to their own villages. This complete denial of reality is doing great damage to the international standing of a government which until recently benefited from immense goodwill. I call on the government to end its current cruel military operation with accountability for all violations that have occurred and to reverse the pattern of severe and widespread discrimination against the Rohingya population. So we'll keep an eye on that one. He then went on to talk about Yemen. Of course, the war in Yemen continues despite getting virtually no coverage in the press. And he said that the human rights situation in Yemen is extremely alarming. And for the third time before this council, I urge establishment of an international and independent investigative body to carry out comprehensive investigations of violations and abuses of human rights law and international humanitarian law. The suffering of the Yemeni people is now compounded by the grave epidemic of cholera, which is a direct result of indiscriminate attacks by parties to the conflict on medical centres and other protected objects, as well as sieges, blockades and restrictions on movement. The devastation of Yemen and the horrific suffering of its people will have immense and enduring repercussions across the region. And of course, Saudi Arabia, the main protagonist there, the main problem in Yemen, they're causing the most damage by bombing everything that it can see. So I thought it was interesting that the High Commissioner had this to say. I also suggest consideration be given to the need to exclude from this body states involved in the most egregious violations of human rights. Of course, Saudi Arabia, everybody felt it was appropriate that they should be on the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. So I think they are the main target of this comment from the High Commissioner. But I don't think anybody would disagree that it's about time Saudi Arabia was removed from that position, and well, a bit more besides.
Yeah. Hypocrisy.
Absolute
is the word that comes to mind.
Absolute. Now, I wanted to highlight this article on Project Syndicate, Winning the War on Child Sexual Abuse. This is by Kailash Satyarthi, who's a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. He's honorary president of the Global March Against Child Labour and the founder of various organisations fighting child sexual abuse. And he's talking about, well, he says this: despite a shared interest in protecting children, sexual predation upends millions of young lives every year. Now rights advocates and campaigners in India are calling for a global war to end the silence that has sustained this scourge. And he goes on during the course of the article to highlight the scale of the problem globally. He says the numbers are truly alarming. According to a 2016 World Health Organization report, 1 in every 4 adults was sexually abused as a child. A 2007 Indian government study found that 53% of children in India face some form of sexual abuse growing up. And human trafficking, especially trafficking of children, is a booming business with annual average profits totaling $150 billion. In other words, child sexual abuse is a moral epidemic afflicting the entire world, one that we can defeat only when we openly declare war against it. Now, I just want to take this opportunity to highlight the figures from the National Crime Agency on the UK on modern slavery in the UK. And as you can see, sexual slavery is by far and away the most common form of modern slavery in the UK. This isn't just immigrants, by the way. This is UK nationals as well involved in modern slavery in this country. And the really despicable aspect of this, in my view, was the graph in red now, which shows the proportion of those figures that involved people under the age of 17. So 95% of those stuck in lives of sexual slavery in this country are children. So this may be a global issue, but it seems to me that it is particularly prevalent in this country, Brian.
Particularly prevalent, and we're just going to have a little look at how the BBC in particular and the press are reacting to this subject of child abuse, where in UK there is a wall of silence. So I think we're unlikely to see the UK leading a world campaign against child abuse. So let's bring in the BBC news site. This was this morning. I was having a look at what they were having to say about the situation in Florida. And of course, it's the Florida picture that catches your eye. But then I was drawn to this, which is a little graphic. And it's talking about the paedophiles who don't want to abuse. And I thought that was a very interesting mix. I was also interested by the graphic because it was drawn in a particular style. And interesting that the BBC put this up with a major graphic at a time when obviously people are looking for the headlines to do with Florida. So if you got into the article, here it is, the young paedophiles who say they don't want to abuse children. Another one of the specially drawn graphics for this. Why we would need to have an artist, somebody within the BBC or commission to produce these special graphics, I don't know, but a lot of effort gone into this article. And what's the BBC doing? Well, really, the BBC is supporting paedophiles because what they are saying in this article is that there are some paedophiles who say they would never abuse children, and there's no support for these poor people, Mike. So the BBC's interviewed one or two of them, and they've said, well, yes, they're attracted to young children, but they would never ever abuse them. And the BBC is concerned that there's not enough assistance for these people. So major article, it's talking about the opinions of psychologists and psychiatrists, and at the end of it the BBC is saying, well, these people exist and it's terrible really, there isn't more support for them. So interesting who would produce this article. It's a lady identified up at that part of it. Here she is, Catherine Burns. And I was just interested to see what sort of background she'd got to get into this extremely important subject of child abuse. Well, she's a Newsbeat reporter. Well, that's where she came from. I don't think I've ever seen anything as childish as this, Mike, with any of the BBC reporters. She says, advice to anyone who wants to get started in journalism, all the usual stuff, get loads of work experience, be keen, do a post-grad course, well, hopefully get yourself into debt, that would be good. Start buying lottery tickets, but it won't make you rich.
That's because journalism won't make you rich.
Yeah, 3 words that describe you. She describes herself as a future lottery winner. And where would she like to be in 10 years' time? With a lovely husband and kids, a great job, luxury second home in the south of France. She says that should be easy, right? And if she wasn't a news reporter, she'd like to be the proud owner of a karaoke bar.
Good.
So this is the quality of BBC journalism into this deeply important subject. So why are we interested? Well, over the weekend, this came out that the investigation into Ted Heath is going ahead and a report is going to come out. And here's the Mail. Interesting that they are telling the lie again, because they say the Chief Constable, Mike Veal, who says allegations against the ex-PM are 120% genuine. He never said that, and the UK column picked the Mail up. This was a statement made by somebody within the police force. It was not attributable directly to the Chief Constable, but the Mail is prepared to stick with that. But nevertheless, they say that the report is going to come to the surface. But behind the scenes, of course, the establishment has been working exceptionally hard to undermine Chief Constable Mike Veal. So this was going back to June, where all of a sudden there was a little flurry that we were going to have a judge, Richard Enrique, who was going to review Mike Veal's investigation, because really there was no substance to it. So I thought this was worth having a little look in. Just Google. I know it's got some limitations, but I put in Ted Heath investigation, and up came some results, all UK major news sources, but they did not include the BBC. And in fact, to get something by the BBC on Ted Heath, you have to put in BBC into the search. And then the latest is down here back in, I think that's April 2017. So it seems that the BBC are very reluctant to report on any of the investigation around Ted Heath at the moment, Mike.
Can't imagine why that would be.
Can't imagine why, but we just remind people that this was the BBC going back a little while. They were very happy to have a major article saying that Edward Heath was completely asexual, and an advisor said that. Who did the BBC choose as that advisor? Well, it was Lord Armstrong. He said that he knew Heath for 35 years, worked with him closely, good friends. And he said you usually detect some sense of sexuality when you're friends or work closely with people. I think Heath was completely asexual. There are some people like that, and I think he was one of them. Right. So this was the BBC's evidence that there was nothing to see, no story. Well, Lord Armstrong, of course, had been in the press quite considerably. This was the Mail, which had picked up on the fact that he'd been asking questions in the House of Lords. And he said to ask Her Majesty's government, in light of the recent statement by the Chief Constable of Wiltshire Police, whether they will institute a judicial inquiry into the force's Operation Conifer with unrestricted access to all relevant information. So this man that the BBC promoted wanted to disrupt the investigation into Heath. Just a coincidence, presumably, Mike?
Presume.
So if we look at that in a bit more detail, here's the man, and he's been in the press because some years ago he would not reveal the name of another MP who was accused of child abuse. So he protected another member of Parliament. That caused a furore, but he didn't give in. He didn't give the name of the person. And we should surely see that in context against Tim Fortescue, the chief whip for Margaret Thatcher, who openly said that MPs came to the whips in order to have problems fixed, could be problems with small boys.
Yeah.
So remarkable. BBC doesn't want to go near this one, but if it is reporting, it's busily sticking up for Ted Heath. Now, of course, it's not only the BBC that's being shy. Just bring in this email. This is between Robert Green and Mr. Gray, who's the MP for North Wiltshire. Mr. Gray's also been having a snipe at Chief Constable Veal, and Robert Green has taken this man to task. He says, "I note you have not responded to my email regarding your conduct toward Chief Constable Veal, despite this issue being in the national interest, including those of your constituents as it relates to the issue of child sexual abuse. I do not understand how you are able to infer that the Chief Constable's investigation is unjustified unless you have access to confidential police documents, quite apart from the issue of the Tim Fortescue interview on BBC TV. So Robert Greene really taking this man to task, a very good email. And of course, what then happened is a bit of rapid backpedaling by Mr. Gray, who said, well, Mr. Greene, let's wait and see what the report on Operation Conifer says. But what I see, Mike, is the government sticking together. These MPs know that dirty stuff has been going on, but they're going to do everything possible to protect each other. And I'm just going to remind people, here is Chief Constable Mike Veal. It was the UK column that encouraged people to go online to YouTube and have a look at the work this Chief Constable was doing, have a look at his video open letter to the public about why he was investigating. Did we make a difference? Well, we did, because initially there was less than 1,000 views, and since UK Column's been promoting this, it's now up to nearly 13,000. So have you been online? Have you seen what this man has to say? If you haven't, then you've no excuse when people are saying, what do the police do? This man needs support. And we just end on this subject by bringing up this one. Thank you to the viewer who alerted me to this, but they're pointing out that the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority has been denying sexually abused children, well, the adult survivors, they've been denying them compensation because they're saying, well, it's your fault you were abused because you agreed to the sex, you were groomed. So this is astonishing stuff. This is the Chief Executive, Carol Oatway. Of course, she's received a gong for her good work for society. But I found very easily on the internet an excellent article back in 2013 where somebody was already on her case, a paedophile special, the fat kitten at the CICA on $95,000 a year, who keeps sex abuse victims waiting for their compensation. And that article also points out that while she earns £95,000 a year, what is the payout to the abuse victims? About £3,000. It's appalling stuff, run by the British government, and of course Theresa May at the moment in charge.
Okay, let's go international again, and Ukraine. Well, Mikhail Saakashvili up to his old tricks, it seems. So this is former Georgian president and former governor of Odessa, Mikhail Saakashvili, who crossed into Ukraine from Poland yesterday. He claims this was the result of his supporters unexpectedly sweeping him through the cordon that was there. We'll talk about that in a second. I've got to ask, how is this possible? How did Saakashvili get into Poland, since he has no citizenship? Presumably he's got no passport, but anyway, he was there and he was trying to get back. And probably as important, why did he do it? Well, our understanding is that he had just been on the telephone with his Uncle George, who had told him that he needed to kick off another revolution in the Ukraine.
George Soros, that'd be, would it?
Yeah, it would be, yeah. So flanked by, as various people have said, flanked by dozens of associates, they were all shouting, Misha, Misha, which of course is his nickname, and they were waving Ukrainian flags. He burst his way through a cordon of immigration officers that were trying to prevent him getting into Ukraine. Well, that's good. He got into Ukraine, he made a statement, and the Ukrainian police have now said that they have opened criminal proceedings against him. They describe it as an illegal crossing into the country. So they put him on, they've started a legal proceeding against him. 5 years is what he could, or anybody that was associated with him could get in prison. He's also ended up being put on the relevant Ukrainian website, which I'm not going to try and pronounce, which is a list of people that are considered enemies of Ukraine. So he is now formally and considered an enemy of Ukraine, which is all, he's starting to lose countries, Brian, because he's already an enemy of Georgia, where he was president for a while, and he's looking at criminal charges in that country. Now he's looking at criminal charges in Ukraine as well. But of course, what he's aiming to do is kick off a revolution there. And let's not forget that just a couple of months ago, we were mentioning the fact that he had had his citizenship stripped from him by Poroshenko. And he had produced this little video absolutely having a mank about that today and being subjected to the same approaches that are used by Ukraine's prosecutors or bureaucrats against regular Ukrainians whose rights are spat upon, was what he was complaining about at the time. He's stateless.
Stateless.
Absolutely stateless.
Interesting that we come in that angle for that gentleman, and we're back in the subject of money. Who controls the big money which is being used to buy politicians and buy countries?
Yeah.
George Soros.
Absolutely. And we'll just end on this one then, because Michael Fallon, the Minister of War, was unveiling what he was describing as an ambitious new national shipbuilding strategy. I'll try not to laugh as I say this, but
I'm going to cough instead. Sorry.
Yes, okay. And apparently that meets the challenge set by Sir John Parker last November, which was the challenge to redevelop Britain's shipbuilding. And it also sets out plans for the first batch of Type 31E frigates. Michael Fallon said this new approach will lead to more cutting-edge ships for the growing Royal Navy that will be designed to maximise exports and be attractive to navies around the world.
Yeah.
So are we producing ships for ourselves or for other people? I'm not clear about that. But apparently they're going to start, this is going to provide jobs in Scotland for up to 35 years. So that's pretty good if it is the case. But I do question this statement that there is a growing Royal Navy. Now, of course, they're producing new ships, but are they producing the new ships faster than the decommissioning the old ones? I don't think so. Well,
no, they're not. And to say the Royal Navy is growing is a complete and utter lie, but this is what Michael Fallon is about, isn't it? So we're boasting our carriers at the moment. We still haven't got the right aircraft for those. We still don't quite know how we're going to man them because, of course, they were planning to do that with the French.
Well, maybe they consider that these aircraft carriers are the equivalent of 3 other ships, so they can decommission 3 ships and have 1 aircraft carrier, and that produces a growing navy. I don't know, but anyway, you'll be pleased to know, Brian, that on Friday, the naming ceremony for the Prince of Wales took place, which is the second of the 2 aircraft carriers. And Fallon had to say the Prince of Wales is a prestigious name for what I'm sure will be a most prestigious ship. There you go. I'm not going to say any more about that.
I'm right in saying the last Prince of Wales was sunk by the Japanese. I may be wrong on that, but I think I'm right. Would I trust Michael Fallon? I don't think so. And of course, if we just remember that his expertise is in children's nurseries, and at the moment he's become the total spokesman for Britain's defence policy. We never see any real comment from the military themselves. We're not seeing any comment from senior retired military officers who know all of the problems going on. They're all silent or too scared or playing golf or both. And Fallon is just allowed to do what he pleases. But presumably this will be defence sales which will really be out there to help communities overseas. This will be aid.
That's
soft power.
That's part of it, but no, a large part of this as well is about the consolidation of defence procurement as well. So that's all snuck under the. He doesn't mention that too much overtly. That's kind of covert speak.
So this will be built within the European Union as if nothing's changed.
Absolutely.
That's it. Well, remarkable. I have to say, after being away for a little while, that. When you get back into the news, the same theme emerges, which is of total lies and disinformation from the British government on any policy, whether it's overseas or in the UK. And of course, the thing driving that policy is the control through the abuse of children. And if we head down that route, of course, we quickly come into money, huge sums of money, and the international banking cartels. Don't believe what we say, check it first and make up your own mind. But I think we're seeing very clearly the problems in UK are coming straight out of Westminster. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.